My girlfriend said, "Your job is embarrassing." I felt humiliated and heartbroken, but I didn't react. I focused on my work, grew my business quietly, and watched opportunities unfold. Months later, I bought her company without a word. When she saw me as the owner, she couldn't believe it. We were sitting on her couch, her legs tucked under her, wine untouched on the table. The TV paused like it didn't want to be part of this. I laughed at first. Reflex. Surely she's joking, I thought. She wasn't. "You're smart," she continued, tilting her head. "I just thought you'd be further along by now." That was the night I realized love can humiliate you. I met Lauren 3 years earlier at a friend's engagement party. She was sharp, confident, dressed like she belonged in every room she walked into. She worked in corporate strategy for a mid-sized tech firm, talked fast, thought faster. I was different. I ran a small logistics consultancy, boring on paper, profitable in reality. I helped struggling companies fix broken supply chains. No fancy title, no flashy LinkedIn posts, just contracts, spreadsheets, and long nights. When Lauren asked what I did on our first date, I explained it simply. "Oh," she said, smiling politely. "So, consulting." I should have noticed the pause. At first, it didn't matter. We had chemistry, long talks, lazy Sundays, inside jokes. She loved that I listened. I loved that she challenged me. But over time, little comments crept in. "You should really think about scaling up. My boss's husband just made partner at a firm like yours. Don't you get bored doing that?" Each time, she laughed afterward, like it was harmless, like I was supposed to laugh too. I didn't. Still, I stayed. Because love makes you explain away things you shouldn't. "She's just ambitious," I told myself. "She wants the best for us." Then came dinner with her coworkers. They all worked at the same company. Same jargon, same tone, same subtle competition masked as politeness. "So what do you do?" one of them asked me, swirling his drink. I answered. There was a nod, a quick smile. Then the conversation moved on straight into IPO rumors and executive reshuffles. Lauren didn't say a word. On the drive home, she was quiet. "What?" I finally asked. She hesitated, then sighed. "I just wish you'd talk more confidently about your work." That one hurt, but I swallowed it. The real break came months later. That night, on the couch. "Embarrassing," she said again, softer this time. "I don't mean you. I mean how it looks." I felt my chest tighten. "So I embarrass you." She didn't deny it. "I just don't see a future where I'm introducing you to clients or executives," she said. "They wouldn't take you seriously." I stared at the wall behind her. "Don't react. Don't give her the satisfaction." "So what are you saying?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe you should aim higher. Or maybe we're just at different stages." Different stages. 3 years together, reduced to a corporate euphemism. I stood up, grabbed my jacket. "Where are you going?" she asked. "For a walk," I said. "I need air." She didn't stop me. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry. Because I was clear. Something snapped, not loudly, but permanently. I replayed every comment, every look, every time she'd corrected how I described my job, every time she'd compared me to someone else's husband. I wasn't enough for her world, I realized. And for the first time, I stopped trying to be. The next morning, I didn't text her. Neither did she. Instead, I went to work. Real work. One of my long-term clients, a struggling software company, had asked me to help renegotiate vendor contracts. I'd been embedded with them for months, knew their numbers better than their CFO. During a meeting, the CEO pulled me aside. "Have you ever thought about getting into acquisitions?" he asked casually. I blinked. "Why?" He smiled. "Because we're looking to sell, and you understand our business better than anyone." I went home that night and opened my financials. Not projections, actuals. The numbers stared back at me calmly, unimpressed by my self-doubt. Quietly powerful. I had cash reserves, investments, quiet equity stakes I'd never talked about because, why would I? I'd spent years building something stable instead of flashy. And suddenly, I wondered who had really been behind. Lauren texted me 2 days later. "Are you okay?" I stared at the message, then put my phone face down. Over the next few weeks, my life narrowed into focus. I hired a lawyer, then another, then a private equity advisor, someone who spoke in numbers, not ego. Opportunities unfolded quickly once I stopped underestimating myself. One afternoon, during a review meeting, a familiar company name popped up on a screen. Lauren's company. The same logo I'd seen on her laptop 100 times. the one she wore proudly on her hoodie. I leaned forward. "Why is this on the list?" I asked. My advisor glanced at me. "They're bleeding cash, leadership issues, potential acquisition target." The room felt suddenly very quiet. "You're kidding," I thought, but he wasn't. I said nothing, just nodded. That night, Lauren called me. "I miss you," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I looked at the spreadsheet still open on my laptop. The numbers didn't lie. "Yeah," I said. "We can talk soon." And for the first time since that night on the couch, I smiled. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. The weeks that followed were quiet. Lauren tried texts, calls, even showing up at my office once, but I didn't respond. I let her chase me while I built a plan so meticulous it almost felt cinematic in my head. I wasn't out for petty revenge. I wanted her to see me not as the embarrassing boyfriend, but as someone she had underestimated. I started small. Calls with her company's accountants, discreet conversations with their board members, even late-night emails to vendors she had struggled to manage. Every detail she'd ignored or dismissed, I absorbed. Every weakness, I cataloged. I knew the company's worth, its potential, and its problems down to the tiniest decimal. And more importantly, I knew it was hers. And it was hers because she had worked for it, but she hadn't protected it. A month later, the acquisition offer was drafted. I remember sitting in my home office, staring at the numbers. I had the cash. I had the connections. I had the plan. And soon, I would have her company. When she finally reached out again, it was almost apologetic. "I miss what we had," she said, voice tight but nervous. "I was wrong about you. I held up a hand. "Lauren, save it." She hesitated, waiting for me to continue. I didn't. Instead, I watched her struggle for words, probably expecting some weak version of reconciliation. She didn't know yet that the chessboard had changed. The day of the acquisition meeting was surreal. I walked into her office, not as her boyfriend, not even as a former boyfriend, but as the man who was about to own everything she had built. The receptionist barely recognized me. The same office that had felt like hers now felt like mine because soon, it literally would be. The board members were skeptical at first. "You?" one of them said. "You run a logistics consultancy. This is a tech firm." I smiled. Calm, steady. "Exactly. I understand efficiency, numbers, and value. And that's what your company needs." They didn't see it coming. I didn't shout or demand. I simply laid out the offer, every asset evaluated, every liability accounted for. By the end, there was no debate. I had control. Lauren walked into the room halfway through the meeting. She froze. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. I didn't gloat. I just looked at her. The same piercing gaze she had used to call my job embarrassing, now mirrored in disbelief. How?" she stammered. I let a beat pass. Then, "I guess you underestimated me." Her face shifted from confusion to shock to something I recognized. Regret. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt right. Like a balance had been restored. Years of being dismissed, corrected, and belittled all funneled into this moment. The following weeks were tense. Lauren had to report to me. She had to answer to decisions she might not agree with. I kept it professional, always calm, always composed. But every interaction was a reminder of that night on her couch. "You don't have to do this," she said one afternoon in my office, voice almost breaking. "You could just let it go." I leaned back in my chair, watching her. "I don't hold grudges. I hold results." She looked down at her hands. She's realizing now what I felt for years. And yet, I wasn't cruel. I didn't fire her. I didn't humiliate her. I just reminded her subtly that respect was a two-way street. Every decision I made, every instruction I gave, reinforced a simple truth. Underestimating someone doesn't erase their worth. Weeks turned into months. Lauren adapted, or at least survived. She was competent, undeniably talented, but she now had to acknowledge me, not as a boyfriend, but as the owner. Meetings, strategy sessions, board votes, her world was no longer untouchable. She had to answer to someone she thought was beneath her. One evening, we stayed late at the office. I looked over the numbers, and she looked over a report beside me. There was silence at first. Then, almost shyly, she spoke. I was wrong about a lot of things," she admitted. I nodded, focused on the spreadsheet. "I know." She looked up. "And I respect you. I respect what you've done. I wish I had seen it sooner." I didn't smile. Not yet. I let her words hang in the air, heavy with the weight of the past. Then, softly, I said, Sometimes respect comes with consequences. She nodded, accepting it. Or maybe she just had no choice. By the end of that year, the company was thriving. I implemented changes, optimized operations, and stabilized the leadership. It wasn't just my victory, it was a transformation of something she had built but hadn't nurtured properly. And in the process, I found something I hadn't realized I was missing: validation. Not from her, not from anyone, from myself. And Lauren? She stayed on, professionally cordial, never crossing the line, never trying to undermine me again. I suspect she learned more from losing control than she ever did from her own corporate successes. Late one night, long after she left the office, I sat in my chair, staring out at the city lights. The silence was comforting. I had won, yes, but not just in the traditional sense. I had won by believing in myself when someone else doubted me. I had won by taking control of my life rather than explaining it to someone who didn't value it. Sometimes closure isn't about revenge. It's about proving to yourself that you matter. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I finally smiled, not at her, not at the acquisition, but at me. I didn't lose her that day. I found myself. The first months after the acquisition were a strange kind of peace. My life, once dictated by her expectations and subtle judgments, finally felt mine. I made decisions, set strategies, and implemented changes without hesitation. The company thrived under my leadership, and I thrived along with it. But old habits die slowly. Lauren still tried, occasionally, to sneak back into my personal orbit. A coffee invitation here, a casual text there. Just to catch up, she'd say. But I wasn't the same person who had sat silently while she dismissed my work as embarrassing. One rainy Thursday, she showed up at my office unannounced. I was reviewing quarterly reports, the city skyline blurred behind the glass. She stood there, soaked and hesitant, her arms crossed. I wanted to talk, she said. I didn't look up immediately. I wanted to measure my own reaction before I reacted. About what? I asked calmly. About us. About me. I realize now how wrong I was. Her voice cracked slightly. I judged you. I judged your career. I finally looked up. Her eyes were pleading, but something in me had shifted so permanently that the old hurt didn't rise in the same way. It lingered, but as a quiet reminder, not a knife twisting. I know, I said. She blinked, confused. You forgive me? I leaned back, measuring the words. It's not about forgiveness anymore. Her brows furrowed. Then what is it about? Respect, I said. Mutual respect. That's the only thing that matters. She nodded slowly, digesting it. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't seeking vengeance. Not really. I was seeking validation not from her, but from myself. From the countless nights I worked alone, the sacrifices I made, the risks I took. This was my victory, lived out quietly but fully. The real test came during a board meeting a few weeks later. Lauren, still technically part of her own former company, tried to push a risky expansion plan. A huge gamble, one that could have cost us everything. She made her case with all the confidence she once used to belittle me. I listened quietly, nodding as if considering. Then I spoke. Let's look at the numbers, I said, pulling up projections. If we do this, our liabilities skyrocket, and our market position becomes unstable. The reward isn't worth the risk. Her eyes widened slightly. You've analyzed it? I always do, I said calmly. The room went silent. The board shifted uncomfortably. Lauren's face was a mix of surprise and something I hadn't expected. Admiration, not for me personally, but for my work, for the very thing she had once dismissed as embarrassing. That day, she stopped questioning me. Not out of fear, exactly, but out of respect. She knew I wasn't just the man she had underestimated. I was her superior now, in a way she couldn't ignore. And I realized something then. Power is quiet, and satisfaction doesn't always need fireworks. A few months later, we had a company retreat. I watched her interact with the staff, now in a subordinate role, and something inside me softened. She wasn't malicious, just misguided. Ambitious, yes, but blind to how she treated people who didn't fit her mold. We ended up alone on the terrace one evening. The sun was setting, painting the skyline orange and gold. She spoke first. I'm sorry, she said, for everything. For underestimating you, for making you feel small. I studied her face. The girl who had called my career embarrassing was here, genuine in her remorse. I took a deep breath. I'm not angry, I said. I just needed to show myself that I was enough. Her lips trembled. You've done it. You've really done it. I smiled softly. I didn't do it for you, and that was the difference. The next year was transformative. The company grew faster than I had ever imagined. Lauren adjusted, learning to respect boundaries, learning to value my expertise. She became competent, not just because she had to, but because she had to acknowledge me. Meanwhile, I realized the most important lesson of all. Self-worth doesn't come from approval. Not from lovers, not from bosses, not from society. It comes from knowing your own value and acting on it, even when no one believes in you. Occasionally, I'd see her in meetings, the same sharp, confident woman I had fallen for. But now, there was an unspoken distance. Not resentment, not bitterness, just clarity. We had both grown, but in different ways. I owned the company, I owned my life, and she learned the hard way what it meant to truly respect someone. Late one night, alone in my office, I looked out at the city. Lights twinkled like a million tiny reminders of what had been accomplished. I thought back to that couch, to the words that had hurt so much. Your job is embarrassing. I smiled. Quietly, privately. Those words no longer had power over me. I poured a glass of whiskey, sat back, and reflected. Life had a way of balancing itself, not with drama, but with consequences. Not with revenge, but with growth. Not with humiliation, but with respect. Sometimes, I thought, the most satisfying victories are the silent ones. I didn't need to prove her wrong to the world. I needed to prove myself right. The next months were a lesson in subtle power. I didn't need to announce myself, post flashy updates, or throw money around. The company's growth spoke for itself. Every efficiency gained, every contract renegotiated, every vendor satisfied, it all built a quiet empire that no one could ignore. Lauren tried to adapt. At first, her attempts were awkward, bordering on defiant. She'd push ideas that made sense on paper but lacked practicality. I'd listen, nod, and gently guide her toward better solutions. Sometimes, she bristled. Sometimes, she sulked. But slowly, she learned to respect the rhythm of decision-making that had once been invisible to her. One afternoon, I found myself in a meeting with our top clients. Lauren was there, presenting a project plan. I sat back, watching as she nervously went through the slides. She stumbled once, paused, and looked at me. I nodded, barely perceptible, and she regained her confidence. Afterward, she whispered as we walked out, I understand now. I see how you do this. I smiled faintly. You're learning. It wasn't pride, exactly. It was relief. Relief that the person who had belittled me could now see value where she once saw embarrassment. But there was something else simmering beneath the surface, a vindication that needed no words. The turning point came unexpectedly. We were hosting an industry conference, one of the biggest in the region. Executives from all over attended, some familiar faces, some competitors. Lauren was in charge of logistics for the event, a role she had once scoffed at when I'd asked her opinion on operations. Halfway through, a crisis hit. One of our key speakers canceled last minute. Lauren froze. The room was tense. And then, I stepped in, calmly, strategically. I rearranged the schedule, coordinated replacements, and soothed client concerns, all while keeping my presence barely noticeable. By the end, the event ran smoothly. The board was impressed. Clients were delighted. And Lauren, she looked at me with wide eyes, a mix of awe and humility. Later that evening, she approached me alone. I didn't realize, she said, voice soft. You're remarkable. I let the word hang. I've always been remarkable, I replied quietly. Her eyes flickered regret, admiration, maybe even a twinge of guilt. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. The proof was there. Silent but undeniable. As months passed, the professional tension between us evolved into a curious truce. She respected boundaries, I respected results. Occasionally, she'd attempt a joke about my so-called embarrassing job, but it no longer stung. I'd laugh softly, a private acknowledgement that the joke no longer held power. One rainy evening, I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office when she appeared unexpectedly. You're still working, she said, holding a cup of coffee like an offering. I gestured to the chair. Join me. She sat down, hesitant. For a moment, we simply watched the rain streak the windows. Then she spoke, carefully. I want to understand. How did you do it? I leaned back. I stopped trying to impress you. I started trusting myself. Her gaze softened. I judged you. I thought my world was the only one that mattered. And? I asked. She sighed. I was wrong. There was silence. Then, softly, almost reverently, she said, "You're incredible." I smiled, quietly satisfied. Not because of the compliment, but because she finally saw the truth, not just in my achievements, but in my persistence, my intelligence, my resilience. The company continued to flourish. Revenue grew steadily. New clients arrived, and the staff thrived under an environment of competence and quiet accountability. I rarely needed to assert myself loudly. The work spoke for me, and Lauren adapted. She became competent, no longer dismissive, no longer condescending. She contributed meaningfully, respected my authority, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, grew into a version of herself that wasn't defined by ego, but by genuine skill. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't humiliation. It was justice in its purest, quietest form. She had underestimated me, yes, but I didn't need to tear her down. I just needed to rise and let her watch. Late one night, sitting in my office alone, I reflected on the journey. From the humiliating words on her couch to this moment of quiet mastery, I realized something profound. Life has a way of balancing itself, not with loud confrontations, but with steady persistence. I poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light from the city skyline. The office was silent, serene, full of the accomplishments I had built quietly, carefully, and without seeking approval from anyone who had doubted me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's living well and letting them watch. I thought back to that night when she called my job embarrassing. It could have destroyed me. It could have made me question everything. But instead, it became the catalyst for my transformation, my growth, my ultimate proof that self-worth cannot be dictated by anyone else. I raised my glass silently to the empty office, to the past, to the lessons learned, and to the future I had claimed, not through aggression, not through spite, but through intelligence, patience, and belief in myself. I didn't need her respect to exist. I needed it to see that I had already earned it from myself. The following year was a study in quiet dominance. I didn't flaunt my ownership. I didn't throw extravagant parties or post endless press releases. I let results speak. The company thrived. Revenue increased by 40%. Vendors were happier than ever. The staff respected me, not out of fear, but because they recognized competence when they saw it. Lauren, meanwhile, had adapted. Her once condescending tone was gone. She stopped questioning my judgment and instead began asking for guidance. Not because she needed me, but because she realized I had something she didn't: foresight. One Friday evening, we were reviewing a new acquisition target over Zoom. Lauren had prepared the report, highlighting risks and potential gains. I noticed she was careful, hesitant. She wanted my approval. "You've done thorough work," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But the projections here are overly optimistic. Adjust the growth rates by 10% and reassess the risk factors." She nodded, taking notes. I didn't need to see the surprise in her expression, but I knew it was there. She had underestimated me once. She wasn't making that mistake again. Later, after the call, she lingered. "You're relentless," she said quietly. I shrugged, almost casually. "I'm consistent. That's the difference." It wasn't a brag. It was a lesson she finally understood. The pinnacle of the story came during a major industry gala. Executives, investors, and media outlets were all present. I walked in quietly, accompanied by my team, and Lauren followed, professional but nervous. She introduced me to a few old contacts, and I noticed their subtle surprise at my presence. "Isn't he the guy who runs the logistics consultancy?" one executive whispered to another. I smiled faintly. The man they had dismissed, the man Lauren had called embarrassing, was now in control of a multi-million-dollar company. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lauren watched them, and I caught her glance. There was recognition there, perhaps even a little awe. She understood now. Later that night, we found ourselves alone in the balcony overlooking the city lights. The noise of the gala drifted behind us, muted. I don't know what to say," she admitted softly. "I underestimated you. Her voice trailed off. I looked at her, calm, composed, but inside, I felt a quiet triumph. "You don't need to say anything," I replied. "Actions are louder than words. You've seen mine." She nodded, swallowing whatever pride remained. There was a long silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that exists after truth has been spoken. After lessons have been learned, months turned into a year, and the company grew steadily. Lauren became a competent executive in her own right, but she never again questioned my judgment. Every strategic decision I made was now backed by data, foresight, and results. She respected it, not begrudgingly, but because she had no choice. I often thought back to that night on her couch, the words that had stung so much. "Your job is embarrassing." Now, they were a distant memory. They had served a purpose not to wound, but to ignite a resolve I didn't know I had. That night had been a turning point, a moment of clarity that pushed me to act, to rise, to prove not to her, but to myself, that my value was never determined by anyone else's approval. One evening, long after Lauren had left the office, I sat alone in the executive suite, reviewing growth projections. The city lights glimmered like tiny reminders of everything that had been achieved. I thought about how quietly satisfying success could be, how revenge need not be cruel, and how validation from the right place the self was worth more than any fleeting approval from someone else.